Hello, welcome to this quick start tutorial on Microsoft Fabric for Power BI users. Actually an end-to-end one. This is Dr. Obinna here. This is going to be a quick one, and I'll just give you a quick run-through on what we will be covering. Basically, in this tutorial, we'll be exploring how you, as a Power BI citizen user, could use Microsoft Fabric for end-to-end reporting. Of course, going into the details is beyond the scope of this tutorial. The aim here is just to give you an overview of how you could orchestrate an end-to-end data processing workflow using Microsoft Fabric as a Power BI developer or user, as the case may be. So, in the first instance, we will be covering the data preparation and basically this would involve a couple of steps. First, you need to determine the data source, where your data will be coming from. I've added a description to this, a description for this video, so you would see a link to a Power Query template that already has data sources loaded into it. And then when we get that data, we will need a place to store the data. And that introduces us to the concept of the lakehouse in Fabric. Of course, there are different stores where you could store your data, but in this instance, we'll be using a lakehouse. So we'll get the data and we push it into the lakehouse. But before the data gets into the lakehouse, we need another tool to be able to orchestrate that movement and some of the transformations from source to the lakehouse. And in that instance, we will be using the data flow gen tool to do that. Then after that, we'll create a pipeline to help you schedule, refresh, and some automations around what you have here. Then we'll create a semantic model where relationships and measures are created, and then we'll create our automated Power BI report. Just very quick, simple steps. If you've been looking at Fabric, you would have discovered that there are heaps of workloads, different ways to bring data in, different ways to transform data, different places to store them, notebooks, and so on and so forth. And I find that this can be very overwhelming for most people. Which one do you use? For which situation? So this tutorial covers a scenario for a person who's already familiar with Power BI. So here you will be using for your data transformation the Power Query experience that is built into the data flow gen tool. Power Query built into data flow gen tool. That's what we'll be using. So it's a low-code approach, and that's the beauty of Fabric. You have multiple tools for achieving the same objective or goal. So depending on your skill set or you're familiar with, you could pick the one that works for you. Before we move into the demonstration, I want to give you a quick explanation of how this objective flow could better be understood using a water treatment process. Of course, every one of us would have water reaching you in one form or the other in your house, school, workplace, and water goes through different processes before it gets to you, the end user. As I said. So usually the process will start from you have maybe a stream, creek, a river. That's just the water source. And then the water would have to travel through different processes where impurities, sedimentation, filtering happens, disinfection, and then it gets to a storage reservoir from where it gets distributed to end users. Some of these concepts map to the flows you would see in the fabric experience, like the Medellin architecture. We will not be dealing with that here, but I'll cover it in another video. However, for the sake of this demonstration, you have data and that data, let me use here, that data, the maps to the river or creek or sea or wherever natural source you're getting your water from. In our case, the data is actually in form of Packer files. And then you need a way to be able to, like get the water from the stream or the water source to a reservoir and then to end users. The same applies here in Fabric. So you have your data. How do you capture that and apply some of this processing on it? And in data field, that would be what we call transformations. Transform, and that's where you have your data flow Gen 2, which is a low-code tool to help you, standardize out columns and perform a couple of transformation operations on your data. At the end of the day, you want to connect that data to a place that needs to be stored somewhere. Just in the same way that as your water flows from the river, it's not going to remain in whatever tool you're using to grab it. Maybe it's a pipe. You need a store where that water would be. And that's what your lake house does here. So you have your data, and then the lake house is where you store that. However, we know that the water here does not just begin to flow to the end user. The water here will not just begin to flow. Water here is at rest. Water here is at rest. So you need some kind of pump action of force something at different points of the flow to enable a force to be applied so that the water that is at rest is displaced from one level to the other until it gets here to the storage location, and even from the storage location, it begins to flow to the end user. So in the same way as well, in data processing, after you've set up your data flow, in Fabric field, we'll have the data pipeline. And this enables you to orchestrate and move data from different parts, of your pipeline until it gets to the end users. So that is a quick explanation of what we'll be doing. And we'll get our data, build it up, and serve it through Power Query. Data flow Gen 2, because we're on Fabric, even though it's the same experience. And then connect that to our data lake, lakehouse, which is where the data will be domiciled. And then we set up a pipeline to enable that orchestration. And then we'll build a semantic model on top of it in Power BI, where we define relationships between tables. And then from there, we create reports. In the next section, we'll be going into the demonstration of this concept. See you soon.